Hi everyone, and thank you for watching this video about the first days of a new unit of instruction. So let's say, as we have already created our stage 2 plan, so we have our end goals and standards for our unit. We have created a performance task that is aligned to those end goals, and we have a grading tool that is going to empower students and can be used by students to assess themselves. How do we take all of these resources and use them to empower students and develop metacognition? That's what this video is going to be about. Now, I want to say, in many cases, we are already doing these things in our classes. So I hope this is a confirmation of the great work that you are already doing. But there may be some new strategies that you could take into the existing processes that you have for the first days of a unit. And again, maybe I say something that isn't applicable to your specific division or department, or maybe I'm a little unclear in this video. If that's the case, please let me know. My job is to equip you with whatever you need to meet the needs of your students. So please reach out. I want to help find the best way for you with your unique experiences and perspective and philosophy and how you can do this for your classes. So let's get started. Now, in terms of what we want these first days of the unit to be, ultimately, we want to help our students determine what success looks like. And there are two major ways we can do that. One is through assessment modeling, where we take an example of what we're going to ask students to do in the unit. We break it down, we explain our thought processes, and we out loud assess how that example would do. Students can take lots of notes on that process, and that lets them know and gives them a baseline of, okay, so this is what a meets the standard looks like, or a 4 looks like. The other thing that's very useful for students to determine what success looks like is guided discourse. This is where students would work in small groups or individually, and they would work with examples of summative assessments to help identify what success looks like. They can then make anchor charts that in a artistic way explain what different levels of success on a particular standard are. Because ultimately, we want students to know where they want to be, and we want students to know where they are in relation to where they want to be. We want to use these tools to get students to a point where they can make their own goals and track their own progress, because that's going to shift the center of learning from us as educators to them as students. So what I'm going to do is show you one way this process can go. This was done last year in a high school social studies class. So this particular introduction of the unit took 2 class days. And this is what they'd see on the first day. Again, the learning intention is for students to understand the expectations of Unit 7, and they'll know that by translating the rubric for this unit into student-friendly language. So as they come in, I give them the rubric for this unit. And I ask them to underline or highlight any words or phrases they don't understand. This helps immediately clarify aspects of confusion within the rubric, and we'll be discussing this and going through some of those misunderstood or confusing words or phrases later on in this particular period. But I give them about 5 minutes to delve into it. So again, first thing I want to do is explain what the end goals are for the unit. So one of the standards in this unit that we're going to learn is ERA Standard 2.12.E, analyze the causes and effects of alliances and multinational organizations. So I may spend some time talking about what that standard means, why it's important not only within a historical context, but for life. If this is the first time I'm introducing a new type of thinking, which in this case would be analysis, then I need to perhaps explain or give them a short description of what analysis is, and then I may need to build that capacity for them later on in the unit. Again, the first thing I want them to know is new unit of instruction. What is the end goal? What am I trying to get you to learn? You're going to learn how to do X. And everything we do in class is going to be built for you building that capacity. So After I answer any questions students have about what that end goal is, now we can talk about what students will actually do to demonstrate that learning. So we'll have a task sheet. Perhaps I can do it on a slide like this. Maybe I can give them an edited version of the actual task sheet for the summative assessment that wouldn't tell them anything specifically. Or you could just use a slide like this. So what I say is, okay, here's going to be our assessment date. And for this particular standard, what I'm going to ask you to do is to create 2 political cartoons about, in our historical context here, World War I. Now, the first one is going to get them to a basic proficiency level, what I in my class called an attempts the standard, what in elementary school you would consider a 2. And what I'm going to try and do is ask them to do a political cartoon that lets me know, do they actually get the basics of the causes and effects of multinational organizations and alliance systems? The second political cartoon they're going to do is actually attempting to analyze how blank contributed to the post-war world. Now, what I really like about this assessment is, one, I'm not actually telling them what they're going to do the political cartoons on. So that way, they don't know the context of what they'll be creating these political cartoons for. So what that does is it creates a new context for students to apply their knowledge. They're not studying to do a specific thing that they know is coming weeks out in advance and they can plan for. They don't know the context of how they'll be applying their knowledge. It would almost be as if you may have an understanding of how to replace the transmission in a car. But until a particular model and of a particular car, whether it's a truck, a regular sedan, or an SUV comes in, you haven't applied that knowledge. So even though you have a lot of knowledge as a mechanic, you apply it in a context that you encounter. Now, another great thing about this is I can use this for formative assessments quite easily. As we're going through the particular content of World War I, we can look at existing political cartoons from that time period. We can break down the analysis of that political cartoon and the message of that political cartoon, as well as why that's important to the broader historical context of World War I. I could also ask them to make a political cartoon. Maybe the first one I want them to make just hits attempts. Maybe another one I'll do throughout the unit is addressing the meat section of the rubric that we'll be talking about a little bit later. So what this does is if students know here's what I'm going to be asked to do on the summative assessment, I can gear formative assessments to give them lots of practice for this and give them feedback while still allowing for a new context on the summative assessment. Now, after students understand here's what I'm going to ask them to do, let's now talk about how that's assessed. So I'm going to share with them this first part of our rubric. So this is for this particular standard. If you notice from the first slide, the unit has more than one standard that we're addressing, but I just wanted to focus on this particular standard just for this video. So what I do now is I clarify any words or phrases that students didn't understand, because now what they're doing is connecting what the summative assessment is with how it's being assessed. And what this allows students to do is this allows them to translate it into their language. Now, does that mean they know how to use it and what that actually looks like? No, but what I've done is at least clarify confusing words or phrases so that they can then learn to apply it. Now, depending on how many end goals or standards that you have in a unit, let's say if you have 3 standards that you're addressing, this whole process that I just explained could take an entire class period. And that's fine. If it's one standard, especially if it's a standard that has a thought process that they are used to, this may take half a class period. But what we want to do now is use examples so that students can take their translated rubric and they can then actually see what these different proficiency levels look like. So what I did in the second day of our unit is in 2 different groups, so we had about 6-7 students in each group, I gave them 2 different examples of political cartoons in this unit. Now, these particular examples are not directly tied to the context that I would ask students to do. So they don't know, oh, okay, this is what he's going to ask us to do, and then we'll just do that. No, this is a different context in terms of a different context than what they would do on the summative assessment. So we have one example here, and a second one, a third one, and a fourth one. And each one of these corresponds to a different proficiency level on this particular rubric. Now, what students do in those small groups is they'll get two of these examples. They will assess how they think, where they think that falls on the rubric, and why. Now, what I could have done is done some assessment modeling beforehand. If I felt like this was something that'd be really difficult for students to assess, before I had them work with this and do guided discourse, I could assess one out loud, and that would be a good basis for students to then practice this. But in this particular case, the standard isn't incredibly difficult, so I wanted them to jump right into guided discourse. So after they had assessed these, they call me over and they say, here's how we think it's assessed and why, and they'd try to use the language of the rubric as much as possible. If they were completely accurate, I would say you are accurate. If they got one or two of the examples wrong, I would tell them one of your assessments is incorrect or inaccurate. I'm not going to tell them why. I want them to play around with it more. Now, when they can accurately assess these examples, their job is to then teach the other group about what the proficiency level each example reflects and why that is. So then they get a chance to communicate that to someone else. During this time, they can also take lots and lots of notes on the rubric to then take this jargony rubric and explain, okay, here's what that actually means. Once that's done, we would then create some anchor charts. So I take out a big Post-it note, I give them a bunch of markers, and you'd think high school students wouldn't be excited about this, but they really enjoy this. And I say, okay, so can you make an artistic representation of these four different proficiency levels? So they'd work in little groups and they'd make four different Post-it notes with descriptions of what different proficiency levels look like. Does it have to be four? No, you could have one big anchor chart that explains all four, or two. Maybe one of them looks at meets and approaches, or a 4 and a 3. Maybe one looks at attempts and below, or a 1 and a 2. But what that does is that allows students to take all of this time, debrief, and communicate this in their language. And all of this is being used so that students know, again, what is the end goal? How is that being assessed? What am I being asked to do? And this is going to lead to the last thing that happens in that unit, in this early days of the unit. And that's, I want students to actually make a goal for themselves. So I tell them on that rubric, circle how you want to do at the end of the unit, how you actually want to do. And the reason why is twofold. One, I want them to shift the ownership of the learning onto themselves. When you make a goal, then you have a basis to track your progress. And this allows for time in conferencing and time for formative assessments and feedback, where I can detail things they need to improve based on the goals that they had. I'm going to give different feedback if a student wants a C rather than if they want an A, or a B rather than if they want an A. That also allows conversations on, okay, if you want to get this highest proficiency level, here's what you need to do day to day throughout the course of the unit to track your progress. Are you willing to do that? If you're not, maybe you want to choose a different proficiency level. And this, again, continues to push the ownership of learning onto students so that they can track their progress. And this creates the basis for feedback and conversations throughout the course of the unit. Again, if I was unclear on anything, if you have any questions about your process that you go through in the first days of a unit, please reach out. We are all different. We have different experiences, different perspectives, and different philosophies of learning. And I want to make sure that this process can work for each of you individually. So reach out if you have any questions. I'm looking forward to collaborating with you. Have a wonderful day.